It's lesson 12, part 2, and we've set up an initial web API, and it sort of runs with the kind of default out-of-the-box values controller. But what we want to do now is we need to connect our API to our music store database. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our app settings, JSON. And in here, we're going to set up our database connection string. So there's a node that we can put in here called connection strings. So this node is similar to what we have in our web.config doc. So here's the web.config for. So just like our web.config has a connection string section where we can have multiple connection strings, would be the same thing in our JSON document. So in here, again, we're going to define a connection which we may as well call default connection, Pascal case. So rather than rewrite the whole connection string, I'm going to copy and paste it from my MVC web application. I have to re-enter all my credentials. So I'm just going to go to my website, my web application, and it's not entirely, it's not everything. It's my data source, which is my host name, my initial catalog, which is the name of the database, the persist security info, and then my username and password. I don't need the multiple active result sets and app entities. So you can copy it from mine and use my music store, or you can use it from your own. I'm stopping right here. We don't need multiple active result sets equals true. That's the data source, which is the host, the initial catalog, which is the name of the database, persist security info, and our user ID and password. That's what we need inside of those, that set of double quotes. So this section at the end, multiple active result sets and app equals entity framework, we can leave those out. So there's our connection string set up. That was step 1. Step 2, we need to add a couple of NuGet packages that will allow our API to use entity framework. Right? All we have right now is this. So if I go to Tools, NuGet Package Manager, Manage NuGet Packages, and click on Browse, because it defaults to just show what's already been installed. I'm going to click on Browse and search for entity framework. Hit enter. So we want 2 packages. And we can install them separately, or we have 1 package to install the entity framework core, and then there's a second specific package for working with SQL Server. The SQL Server package uses the entity framework core as a dependency. So rather than installing them both separately, if we just install the SQL Server package, it will also install the entity framework core. If I search entity framework core, so we need these 2, the framework core and the framework core SQL Server. So if I install this one, it will also install the core. So click on Microsoft Entity Framework Core. And I'll just select my API and click Install. So this should ask me if I also want to install the core. I'll click Install. So it's actually going to install all of these. So they've updated this a bit. It used to just install the core. It installs abstractions, analyzers, and relational. So I'm just going to accept. So we can do this here. We can also use the NuGet package manager if you prefer the kind of like command line interface. So it's installed and it actually nests the dependencies underneath. I don't think we need to install the core. Let's just see. Yeah, because it's already here. At least I think we can run it now. So close up NuGet. So now we need to make a models folder and we need to create a class to use that will use Entity Framework and connect to our database. So I'll make a new folder. Just right click my project, add a folder. I'll call models. And in here, I'm going to add a class, which just like before, we'll call our music store. It just gives us a class. We can have a look at our music store model and our web application for a minute. So this one we didn't hand code. This was generated by the Entity Framework wizard. But a couple things we're going to copy is that this class inherits from DB context, meaning this isn't just a regular business object. The purpose of this class is to connect to a database. So we're going to use this same inheritance in our API. At least we're going to try. So it says doesn't know what DB context is, but if we make a reference to Entity Framework Core, which I'll accept that suggestion, it adds this reference, and now it knows what a DB context object is. Or we could have made the reference manually first and then added the DB context. So in here, we now just need to write a constructor that basically connects to the database. So this was kind of done automatically for us. Actually, no, sorry, there is no constructor in this version. Oh, yes, there is, sorry, right here. So we're doing something similar. Syntax is a little more complicated in core. We're setting our DB context options. Whoops, sorry. Goes over here. Now, in the web application, we actually specified the base as being default connection right here in the constructor. Again, here was the web version. Right? It says base, and we reference the connection string directly in here. In the web API, there's one kind of extra layer. This sets up the connection, but we're actually reading these options from a separate file. So what we need, these actually get set in this file down here. We have a startup file. So there's our database connection class we should be able to compile. And then we're going to open up startup. Ron? Yep. Just the entity framework core. That's it. Okay. This database connection class doesn't exist without this reference. So we have a startup file. So it sets our compatibility, does some configuration here. So in this configure, so notice what it says. This method is called by the runtime and use it to add services. So that's what we want to do. We want to add our database connection. So we're reading our app settings. We're getting the connection string we call default connection. And then we just pass this to our constructor as an option. Instantiate it, and it will instantiate based on those options. We're adding the database context to the running services. And we specify what kind of database we're using, the SQL Server. Now we get a couple of reference errors, missing references here. That's okay. What two things do you suppose we need to reference to fix these errors so that our database connection can run? Yeah. Our music store model lives in the models namespace. So our controller references the models. Just like in our web application, our controllers had to reference the model. And over here, to use SQL Server, we have to reference the entity framework core here as well. So it added lines 14 and 9. You can see the two yellow lines. Reference the core entity framework library, reference our models, because that's where the database connection class lives. So as soon as our app starts up, it will automatically connect to the database. So unlike in our web application where each controller connected to the database, here our database connection is global in the API. As soon as the API is running, it opens the connection. And now we can build. So we're able to build. So we're going to manually create an albums model. We're not going to create all the models. We're only going to work with the albums model in our API. When we built the web application, we used the entity framework wizard. We did code first from database. It automatically generated all those 6 models, albums, artists, genres. Here we have to do it manually. We don't have that option, but we can just make a simple class easily enough. We'll add a class called album. We'll specify its map to the table called album. And then we can just set up the properties of our album. Dates and sets. may have to modify this a little bit. Notice it doesn't like my two annotations here. Normally we wouldn't need this, but without it, it would expect the table to be called albums plural, because that's the entity framework convention. If our table name is not plural or doesn't match the class exactly in plural, we have to specify the name of the table. So it doesn't like either of these. Again, we're missing references. So if we reference the data annotations schema and data annotations, our errors go away. Now, actually, I think we're going to need an artist ID and genre ID. I don't think we'll be able to add an album without those things. So we better add those properties as well. And if we want, we could set up the same kind of validation rules. We would say our title, for example, is required. So if we do a post request to the API and we leave out the title, it should give us an error. So we've added the references on lines 3 and 4. Everything else should look pretty much the same as it did in our scaffolded model. So the other thing we should do is we need this. Our database connection class needs a reference to that albums model. So if we go back to our music store model, below our constructor, public set of album readable. Our database class knows what an album is. It can read and write to that list. So now we want to create our own controller and see if we can get, for example, write an API method to get all the lists, to get the albums, which we could then call from either a browser or we could call straight from our HTTP tool. So I'm going to add a controller. For the moment, we'll create it as an empty controller, an empty API controller. It's not an MVC controller, it's an empty API controller. And we'll call it albums controller. It's going to add some NuGet packages. So it will run at API/albums. So the first thing we need here is our database connection. We'll create a constructor. Now, it doesn't know what any of this stuff is. Why? Because we have to reference. Bear with me for a sec. What did we do wrong? Oh, sorry. I put this in the wrong place. We're in the namespace. Oh, it's ID controller. So as soon as you instantiate our controller, it will connect to the database. And now we want to write our method that will run. We have a GET request at API/albums. So if we have a GET request at API/albums, right, same query we wrote in our old controller, db.albums. So this actually returns in JSON format. That's the default. Should return our data in JSON format. We can build. I guess we could also order by artist name. We'll just try it like this. I'm going to go here to API/albums, submit a GET request. Okay, so we got 500 error. Let's see what happened. Okay, so it did give us a whole list of stuff. Invalid cast. Okay. So it did connect. Bear with me for a second. We're going to try something else. Just for a minute. Let's try to create the controller this way, the easy way. I'm going to go to controller. This time we'll pick API controller with actions using entity framework. This should actually scaffold our entire controller. Let's see the difference between what it gave us. So we'll say our model is album. Our data context is music store. Have a look at what it does. It's fairly similar. So here's our constructor. That's interesting. That looks kind of the same to me. Let's see what's happening. So there's our API values. How about problems one? Okay, so it's going in here. Fetching our list of albums. Just saying we got 0. No results. Okay, we obviously missed something in the database setup. Just going to review everything we've done. We've got connection string that looks okay. In startup, we've got a reference to our models and a reference to core. I'm a bit puzzled why we're not getting any data. We'll put a breakpoint here and see if we get the same result. Some way, somehow, something is not quite right with our database. Sorry? In the startup, it's null. Okay, that's a good thing to check. Okay, no, it's not null. So it does, at least it's not null here. Interesting, it didn't go. Our database object is not empty. So that configures our HTTP. Well, we'll keep going and see. We run it again. So I think our database is connected. Let's check my album model. Our table is album. Okay, so that's correct. So our database is not null. So it is connecting. We do have a public DB set. So our problem's got to be somewhere else. We'll just check our database connection string, that it is as it should be. Okay, so you've obviously done something different than what I've done. Are you using my database or are you using your own database? You're using my database and you can connect to it. That's good. Does it work for anybody else when you call the API? Nope. Because you've probably made the same mistake, whatever mistake I've made. So let's see again. We've referenced the models. Just going to compare my, so they call their database class context instead. Mm-hmm. And I thought we had done everything we needed to do. Let's just see where. Wonder if the issue may be that we haven't referenced our SQL Server library. We've installed it, though we haven't actually referenced it. Bear with me for just a second. And one other place we can look. Okay. What was the fix? That would be a good idea, wouldn't it? No wonder it can't map to the albums table. Right, there we go. Okay, thank you. So now when I call get, it gives me a JSON object with all of our albums. So that we can see, I'll put it back to how we had it. Thank you, Ron. You want to reorder it, like album title. So right now it's by ID starting with 386, 387. If we return them this way, it starts with punctuation and A. And then we've got our list. Now we want to do our details. Still going to be a get method. It's still going to be at the same URI, except it has an ID on the end. So in here, we just specify this parameter this way, indicating it's a get, but takes a parameter called ID. What should this method return? In effect, is our details method. What data type should come out of it? We pass in an ID. Yeah, now single instead of an IEnumerable. Which method do we call to get one album? You guys did it when you were writing your unit tests. If we call single or default, this is the album ID. Oops, should be ID, of course. But now we should be able to hit that same URL, just stick an ID on the end of it. Instead of getting the list, we'll get that single object. So get is overloaded, different parameters, different return types. So now if I put in a valid ID, I get the matching album. Now, we actually may want to rewrite this because right now this gives us a it was success, but no content. So there's two ways we could handle this. One is in our documentation, we explain if you get a 204 error when you call get, that means nothing was returned. Or what else could we do here? Instead of just returning single or default, for those of you who wrote the details method for unit testing, what could we do instead of doing this all in one line? Ron? Right, we could check. So we can say album equals this. If our album is null, we could return a 404 response. Hang on, I think I do it. We can actually return in this case. You return okay, that's a 200 response. Yeah. This way. Oh, sorry, it's not HTTP not found. Not found. We'll either return a 200 response with an album, or it will return a 404. I think we can try it this way. We'll make sure it still works. With the valid ID, we get our JSON object with a 200. And with an invalid ID, now we get 404. So this is better. So the application that's consuming our API can check the HTTP status code that comes back. Did it get 200 or did it get 404? Sending 404, I think, is more descriptive than sending 204 in this case. We should actually tell them, hey, what you looked for, we don't have. So we've got our two get methods. We just need to write post, put, and delete. From the body, we're generating an album object. Our model state is not valid, so what we get is not a valid album. Yeah. Just restart Visual Studio. I think it just locked the DLL. So if our model state is not valid, we're going to return Add request error. Save the model. So bad request is a 400 HTTP code. So what the other applications sent to our API is no good. We don't like the request. Otherwise, we add the new album, all save changes, same as our web controller. We want to return a different status called the created at action. So it was created at post method. Notice this will return a 201 response. So 201 is the HTTP status code for a new resource was created, which is what we're doing when we're saving a new album. So it was done at the post, through the post action, and we're going to pass in. We can either pass the entire object back, or we could just pass the album ID back. Either one. If we want to just pass the ID, we can just say, whatever application creates a new album, it now will know the new ID. So it might want to save that to its database. So similar code to what we had in our scaffolded web controller, but it would return either a 400 or a 201. So we can try in Postman to do a post request, and we'll have to create an album in JSON format and submit it. And then we'll have to run a get and see if that album got added. So what I'm going to do to make this a little easier, first I'm going to run get with an ID. This is actually, I'm going to test your assignment. And I'm going to grab the JSON that's here, because this gives me the right structure, right? We want to use the same structure for posting a new one. So run a get, put in any valid ID. Then we'll just copy that. Then I'm going to change my method from get to post. And in the body, I'm going to choose raw JSON and paste it in. Now, I don't want an album ID here because the album ID is going to be auto-generated. We're posting, we're not putting it, right? We're adding a new one. You take out the ID line. In the title, I'll put in my name. Many of you are using my database, so put your own name in the album title. So we don't have a whole bunch of albums with the same title. Price. Albums are expensive. I'll just put the artist ID as 1 and the genre ID is 1. So title, price, artist, and genre. I'm going to take out the, so this is the URL I want to post to. So it's the same URL as the get, but it's a different method. We're posting instead of getting. And we're including this body. So when we submit, I get a 201 response, meaning request was fulfilled and a new resource was created, and it's returned the album ID. So now I should be able to grab this album ID. How can I check it to make sure that the album got created with all the right info? How can we use Postman to do it? Right, I'll just grab this ID, put it on the end, and I got to do one more thing. Before I can check. I have to change the method right? Because now we want to run a GET request at our new ID. There's my new album. So I'm going to use Postman. This is actually, I'm going to mark part 3. I'm going to run a GET and see the list of data. Right? Then I'm going to run a GET with one of the IDs and get just that record. I'm going to grab the record, make a post request, take the ID out, modify something, and try making a post request. Then I'm going to run a GET again to make sure that new record got created. Then I'm going to do a put, and then I'm going to do a delete, and then I'm going to give you your marks. So just 2 more methods here. This is going to be put albums. Here we're using HTTP put. Also check our bad request. What happens if I try and post an album with an invalid body? So let's say I misspell, I have title. If I try and send this, I should get a 400 bad request error. Which I do, right? Title's required, I didn't provide it. So we can send validation messages back to the client application. Whatever validations we have, those will go back and the client knows, hey, I've got to fix this. So here we've got 2 parameters. We've got an ID first. We've got the body. We also need the ID parameter in our put. ID get. So for our HTTP get, we have the ID parameter. Both put and delete obviously need an ID. We need to know which album are we editing or deleting. Exact same check here. Add request if they violated any of the validation rules. Otherwise, we mark the album as modified, we call save changes. Now, in this case, we don't want a 201 response because 201 indicates we've created something new. Let's have a look at our HTTP list of HTTP status codes. So which one of these should we use instead of 201 if we're updating? Sorry, 20, and maybe 202, accepted. So we've accepted the changes. So we'll return, instead of a created at, there's an accepted at action. That'll send back a 202 response. We could actually just send back we can just send the full object back. We don't really have to. So there's our update. So now I'm going to grab my new album that I created. So I'll go back, I'll run my get again, 687. So I'm just going to update the price. Copy that current object, change my get to put. I'm going to update the price, $12.99 to $13.99. And I'll call my APA method by clicking the send button. It sends, it accepted our request, and it's updated the price. Again, if I want to just double check to make sure it got updated, I can just run get. And sure enough, the price is now $13.99. So we just need one more method and then we are done, which is the delete method. We're going to HTTP delete. And with our ID parameter. So we're going to look for this ID. If we find it, we'll delete it. If not, we'll send a 404. That album doesn't exist. There's no deleted. So we could probably just return a 200 in this case as well. Look for the album. If we don't get one, we'll return 404. If we do find it, we remove it, we save, we send back an OK response. We can just return an OK. You don't need to send anything back. That object's been removed. We just send back a 200 response. So now I'll try and run a delete method. And if it works, I'll then run a get, and I should get a 404 on my get. If I put in an ID that doesn't exist first, it gives me 404. I put in my new album, gave me 200, nothing came back. And now if I run my get again, no object here. So our delete removed it. So our code is similar. So you can actually scaffold it. The scaffolding code uses some asynchronous calls, which we won't really get into. But it tries to find them, does similar things if you look at what was scaffolded. Really pretty much the same, it just does it asynchronously. So all you need to do, everything you need to do is for part 3 is in here. Not that much work, it's only 5%. the code in startup is going to be exactly the same in your assignment as it is here. There's nothing different. You set up your connection string here. You make your database connection class. Again, it's going to be identical to mine, just with a different name. And you just list your two model names, and then you'll manually build. Actually, I'm not even sure if I said, I may have just said for the API, you only need to do one controller. It's really going to be the same thing twice. For unit testing, I said one controller. What did we say for the? Yes. No, in this case, you should do both of the controllers. You get practice writing those API methods. Okay. So I will mark it just like this. I'll run the get. I'll add a new one. I'll look up a single one. I'll add a new record. I'll make sure it shows up with get. I'll do a put to update it, make sure that change is saved, and then I'll delete the object. So at the end of the day, you won't see anything in your database. Whatever I add, I'm going to update, select, and then delete. So there is no front end to this. We're basically building a back end service that can then be consumed by some other application. If you wanted to go then and take and consume this, go open Android Studio and build a mobile app that consumes your albums API, your API for your assignment, you'd be able to do it, right? This is the data source for it. Okay. That is all for today. I wasn't sure how long it was going to take to get through Web API. So I had allocated 2 classes for it. So next week, we'll do a review for the exam. The other thing that I will ask is we can either review some other things we've done in the class, if you have suggestions of, hey, I'd really like to go over this, or if you have suggestions of anything else with .NET that we didn't cover that you want to look at, please email me in the next day or two, and I can look at maybe spending some time to touch on some other things next week. Okay, Ron?
Can you go back to your method?
Sure.